All right. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, also co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. And thanks so much for joining us this weekend. Happy Fourth to those that are celebrating now. Even though as of this year we'll be having it during the week, but I know many of you will be doing your festivities this weekend. As you well know, on Sundays, we have our breakdown or rundowns of Secret Invasion, and we will be doing the breakdowns of every single episode that aired I guess you'd say, what is that, the Wednesday prior to the airing of each of our given episodes. And each week, we'll also have a terrific guest on tap as our co host to talk about what went down. So, with that out of the way, I want to get into some brief spark notes as to what happened on this week's edition of this week, or I should say, not this week in review, but with our breakdown of Secret Invasion. So, without further ado, let me get into the goings on of what happened in this week's episode 2. Last we left off with Secret Invasion. As we as the audience, we were introduced to the nefarious scheme that was afoot, and that scheme involved the scrolls, which we were first introduced to in Captain Marvel. Scrolls have been infiltrating all levels of our infrastructure on Earth, and the reason that we know this is in our opening sequence of the first episode, it's revealed that Everett Ross uh, was, in fact, a Skrull. So later, we're provided with our established parties, our established sides. On one side, we have Talos, who brings this said scheme to the attention of Maria Hill, who, of course, then reaches out to Nick Fury to join them in trying to bring this scheme to light. And on the other side, we have a disillusioned Skrull named Gravik that is seeking to throw the people of Earth into conflict so that the Skrulls can eventually swoop in and take over the planet amongst the chaos. So, in an effort to thwart these plans, in the closing sequence of episode 1, Fury, Hill, and company find themselves in the middle of a terrorist plot being orchestrated by, again, the disillusioned Skrulls, which results in Hill unfortunately losing her life. Again, sorry, spoiler alert, but again, that happened a couple of weeks ago. But in an effort to, or to say, with this past week's episode, it picks up right from that moment in which Hill has, just lost her life amongst the chaos of this given terrorist plot. But it also provides some insight into the origins of our show's villain, Gravik, who I had mentioned earlier. So further into the episode, we're provided more reveals of how deep this infiltration has gone, as it's revealed that people in high levels of political office are in fact Skrulls. And if that isn't enough, Yuri finds himself in unexpected territory himself with, seemingly no allies. He breaks he has a falling out with Talos, during this episode. As I mentioned before, Maria is gone, and his perceived ally in Rhodey, who is working within the government, if I recall, as Secretary of State, uh, relieves him of his duty. So, with all of that going on, as the episode draws to a close, we're also introduced to another wrinkle, and that is that Yuri is in fact married to a Skrull as well. So, with all of that in mind, I want to get into some of the nitty gritty of some of our Easter eggs and some of our callbacks, and I won't be alone in talking about this. So let me introduce our guest for this week, a good friend of mine. He's been on the show before. He has the organization known as Tim's Tabletop. It's my pleasure to welcome back on the show Tim Luddy. See if I can get him on now. Tim, what is going on, sir?
Hey Brent, how's it going?
Good. So As I said, there's a lot to. As I said, I was just going over kind of the brief tidbits, spark notes, if you will, of what's happened, what recapping episode one and what's transpired in episode two. But just initial impressions. What were your thoughts on the episode?
I liked it. It went a lot. Like the kind of mystery got a little bit deeper with the Skrull Council and Fury's wife, and there's a lot of new questions.
Indeed, indeed. So, with you being our guest co-host this week, I'll punt the ball over to you. Can you tell me, what are some things hopping into like some callbacks, some Easter eggs? What are some things that struck out to you that were cool to see, to have revisited, and perhaps some things that Easter egg wise, if you are an eagle-eyed a fan of the what where they're drawing their inspiration with the story with Secret Invasion, with the comics and other facets that you noticed that you enjoyed.
Yeah, in terms of Easter eggs, the big one is on the computer you saw Groot, the Frost Beast, Extremis. So um, we know they're building up to Super Skrull, and that's a cool way
Yeah,
to do it without the Fantastic Four. That's a cool way
without
to
being
kind of
blatant.
draw on a bunch. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it was cool to see a lot of those things, just as you said, come back of extremis of what we had with Iron Man 3, of Cole Obsidian, if I'm recalling, of what we had with the the group. I'm drawing a blank on the group right now, but Thanos's,
The Black Order.
yeah, the Black Order. Thank you. They're his quote unquote, Avengers team, de facto Avengers team of sorts to speak. So I guess those things were interesting, but also kind of touching on what I had commented on last week is getting further insight into how the scrolls have become disillusioned, and as I was mentioning before, and how they've become the scrolls that we initially expected we were going to get back in Captain Marvel. And to Marvel's credit, as I mentioned before last week, is I like sometimes how they don't all in the MCU, we're not always given what we're anticipating or what we're expecting, but it still comes full circle in many ways, or it still peppers in a lot of those things that we expect of given characters. So, case in point with Spider-Man, right now he's at the status quo that we expect Spider-Man to be at, but that wasn't how he started. So, we had this real broad journey and arc for him of all these things that have transpired before within what we have with the cinematic universe. However, they've still come full circle with that based off of where that character is now. Same thing with Captain America, what we have with the costume. A lot of people ask, how's that costume going to work? In a cinematic context, in a quote unquote heightened reality context that the MCU is supposed to reside in, and we have that with what they did with the propaganda show that they did, where they were still able to check that box, but they still addressed what came before and understood that that was a part of the character. Yet they still were able to move on from that and give us a costume that tactically made more sense in the context of like a real quote unquote a real world context. And so like with the scrolls for the longest time, we were wondering, okay, all right, you guys did something interesting there, but when are we going to get, these evil scrolls? And now we're given a logical motivation as to how they got that way, or how the faction that we come to expect of from scrolls have developed into that those characters that we or those that role that we initially pictured they would be in. So, were there any other things that came to mind initially before we get into some other facets of that episode? Oh, I think I just lost you there for a second. I'll give him a second to hop back on. May just gotten kicked out for a moment. But while we are waiting for Tim to hop back on, um, feel free to drop in the comments if there were some things that have transpired that we haven't discussed now that happened in episode 2 that perhaps you saw that were interesting in terms of like callbacks, in terms of Easter eggs that you enjoyed out of this episode. I guess another thing that was interesting for me was just what had transpired also with, I guess we can say with oh, okay, it looks like we may have Tim back. Hold on. All right, so we lost Tim there for a second, but we have him back. See if I can get him on now. All right, got you back. Just lost you there for a second. But I was just saying,
sorry about that.
oh, you're all good. So before we hop into like the theories and things like that, were there any other details that you enjoyed from this past week's episode that came to mind?
Yeah, I liked what you were saying as far as they kind of found an interesting MCU way to back into like a logic for the Secret Invasion. The other interesting thing was what if the Avengers come back, which was like, because it's been weird in the past couple phases as far as like, are the Avengers a team? Like it's kind of, it comes up every once in a while, like what's going on with the Avengers? Are they still a thing or?
Right, yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think this has been commented. I want to say it has been commented from Feige before, and it's just the idea that I think that they are using this storyline. I feel like they're using the storyline to be able to get into a really loose interpretation of what we have with Dark Reign, and what transpired with Dark Reign of having. And I mentioned this last week, but I'll go over it briefly. Is just that idea of villains taking a lot of these positions of power, and the way that they will allow the Avengers to kind of come back into prominence is having it come full circle where things have to get really bad before they assemble a new official Avengers team. Where at this point, all the Avengers are pretty much disbanded. Like all of our OGs. I mean, Cap, he's old. We still don't know if it's official, if he's alive. They've been speculating, in other episodes, in other series that maybe he's on the moon somewhere or someplace else, and it hasn't really been confirmed. Maybe we'll get a confirmation elsewhere. Thor's off world, so we don't. He's doing his own thing. Captain Marvel is off world, doing her own thing. With all of our other characters, Barden, at this point he's pretty much retired. Black Widow is gone, so like the only person that we have is Falcon, who is now our new Captain America. So maybe I'm assuming within his new film he's starting to assemble that team, but we won't really have an official team, like a legit team, until probably the next Avengers film with King Dynasty. And at that point, even that is up in flux right now. We don't know what's going to happen with that. And real talk, we don't know what's going to happen with that either. So, based on things that are, outside of the world of movies. So we'll see, what happens with that too. But I feel like they're using that using this show as a way to get into what we have with Dark Reign, where we had we had that Secret Invasion arc, and in the discovery of all of this infiltration of these characters getting into all of these positions, that it'll open a door for other factions to hop in there and quote unquote hop in as heroes, so to speak. Because if I recall from like the comics, we have what is it, Osborn. Even though we don't really have an Osborn, we kind of do in a multiversal sense, but officially in our main universe, we don't have a Osborn. So I'm guessing that they may use Ross to do that because, from what I understand, Ross plays a role in Captain America. So I feel like there's going to be a through line from this over into the new Captain America film. I don't know what your thoughts or theories on that are.
That's what the because Ross, I believe, is playing the president in New World Order, and there's a
Spoiler, but yes, he
oh
is playing.
sorry,
Yes, but this is a spoiler show, guys. So yes.
and there's a different president in Secret Invasion right now. So is it a term away, or is something going to happen to this guy?
Yeah, exactly. Which is what my thought process is, either something happens to this guy or take it a step further, just going into the theme of the show, maybe it's gotten that far. Like with all the with what we already were teased with in this second episode, maybe they've gotten that far into office where our president, that current president, as it stands now, is a scroll. Because I mean, if we're thinking of what happened in Endgame and that huge vacuum of what was going down in that period of time where the Avengers were gone, many of the heroes were gone, half of the population was gone. That left a perfect opportunity if there were Skrulls that were around to be able to take over in that period of time. And then once people started to come back to start infiltrating other places or already being in those spots by the time people return. So something to think about. It's really fascinating, how they have those events and how they can delve back into those prior arcs that we know to what we have now.
And yeah, if Ross is the Osborn, like, are the Thunderbolts going to be the Dark Avengers of Dark Reign? Like, that kind of could lead New World
That
Order right into Thunderbolts.
thinking, yeah, that's my thinking for sure. Because in essence, you can still have the Thunderbolts fall into that role. And because of what transpires, because I'm gonna go dig a little deeper in. Now I don't know if you know about this with Thunderbolts, and again, this is get into some spoiler stuff, but I don't think it's too much of a spoiler because it has been confirmed that this character will likely be the villain of Thunderbolts, and that's none other than Sentry. So if we're picturing that Sentry is going to be the quote unquote big bad of the Thunderbolts, I'm guessing he's more of someone who is being manipulated, and the true villain is Val and Ross because they're really trying to re-resurrect this super soldier program that they've been trying to do seemingly since back in the time of Incredible Hulk when we had Abomination. So in having this resurrected super soldier program, I, I'm guessing that things go awry as they normally do. Century, goes AWOL, and it provides an opportunity to demonstrate that yeah, the Thunderbolts were able to kind of help clean up the mess, but at the end of the day, it was still a mess created by Val and by Ross. So, in doing so, it opens the window of the world understanding that they actually do need the Avengers versus, the current string of quote unquote team or heroes that they or anti-heroes that are around at that time. So very, very fascinating stuff. So I guess that goes right into the theories or what ifs. I know we were talking about what was it the secret the not secret the super scrolls. So in terms of the super scrolls, do you have any like further ideas of how they may expand upon that or what they may do, with that arc? I mean, it seems like they've teased it with Gravik, but do you think that they're going to go a step further than Gravik?
That's what, like, especially if it stays just Nick Fury. Like, if it was an Avengers movie, it's like, all right, there's going to be an army of Super Skrulls, you know. But if it's just going to be, you know, this kind of spy thriller, like low level thing, I mean, I don't know how he's going to handle more than one Super Skrull. Like, so it seems like maybe Gravik's the, you know, the guinea pig or whatever, and that's the big, you know, the big conflict of the season. But who knows?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I know a lot. One theory that has been going around, or idea, is that, and it makes sense based on the character with Gaia. So with Talos's daughter, that they may try to turn her into a Super Scroll. That she may potentially also become that, in one way that does make sense, because I don't picture, and I'm brain farting the actress's name from Game of Thrones, but Amelia Clark. Amelia Clark.
Yeah.
I feel like an actress of Amelia Clark's caliber wouldn't take on a role in the MCU unless, you know, there was something to it or it had some meat to it, so to speak. And just being one of the characters, like kids, I don't feel like that would be something that would sway her either way. But if it's something that gives her has further implications where she actually becomes like a legit character that can continue to carry on in other franchises and pop up elsewhere, and if she ends up becoming a Super Scroll, that's a good way to do that. Then perhaps, you know, we might end up, you know, getting something like that. So
Yeah, I
I
can
do.
definitely see her coming, like having a future beyond this series. Like, I'd be very surprised if this is all she does in the MCU.
Yeah, for sure. So let me ask this, because we didn't really get into this. In terms of characters that are scrolls, I mean, we teased it a little bit at the top of the show. I have some other thoughts on some other people who may be scrolls, but maybe, you know, maybe we share those same thoughts on who they may be, or maybe you have some additional ones that you're picturing may be revealed to be scrolls. So in that event, what are some other thoughts that or theories that you have of what may be revealed as we draw, you know, closer to the end of the series?
That's what, going into it, it was, you know, there's got to be one big reveal scroll. Like, so I thought Maria was possible, but if she's gone, it seems like Rhodey's the clear, like, it's not going to be Nick Fury, and we're running out of non-scroll characters.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I share those thoughts with you. So I mean, Rhodey is one, and my only thing with Rhodey is, I know a lot of people say, you know, maybe when they'll ask, okay, if he is, when did it happen? Perhaps it happened during that time during Civil War. You know, in that time that he was injured and had to be hospitalized, that could have been a, you know, a opportune time for like those gurneys to be switched up and someone hopping in there acting like they, you know, they were still injured, and it could have been the scroll, and he could have been the scroll the whole time, which could be crazy because that meant that he was around during, you know, Infinity War, during Endgame, and all this time, like all of those things that had transpired, you know, he had been, you know, going along with what was happening during that time. But it makes sense. It could make sense too, because that could explain how what we had with the Super Scrolls, how they were able to attain a lot of those things, because he would have been around and would have been able to pick up a lot of the DNA with a lot of those characters, unbeknownst to anybody else during that time, and taking it back to the group.
Yeah.
So
That also
uh,
explains Gravik's, like, don't worry about the Avengers. Like, I
yeah,
get them.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And I was gonna say too, based off of what was revealed in episode one with Ross, when do you picture he got switched? Do you have a thought on that, or do you think that he's been one for a while?
that's what I'm wondering. Is, like, has he been living Ross's life, or was that just that day, like, and the real Ross is still out there?
Yeah.
Like, that's another interesting one, because if he's been Ross for a while, um and he's plugged into a lot of a lot of
Wakanda.
stuff with Val and Wakanda. So
Yeah. So like I don't know, like one thing that I thought about just in general when it comes to the show is I don't, and I feel like I would if some of these characters were revealed to be Skrulls the whole time. I would feel a little cheated because there's been a lot of character development with a lot of these characters. So hopefully they're able to have it happen within a time that's relatively recent within the last few films or projects versus it being that way for a long time, because Ross has gone through a lot of like development, with just as we were saying with his interactions with Wakanda, the marriage with Val, like what, like, and where things stand now. So my theory is maybe it happened um after he was on the run. So if I'm picturing after what happened in Black Panther, maybe he's still in the custody of Wakanda, because he's still on the run, and in that time that opportunity was used to be able to have him get switched. Maybe he is captured, or maybe he isn't captured. Maybe he's still with Wakanda, and they just copied him, or maybe within that time. Maybe here's another thought. Maybe in that scene with the Okoye, maybe that was a scroll. Like maybe she was a scroll, and that's when he was switched, because he would, in all likelihood, trust Okoye, and being able to copy one of the Wakandans that he knows. He was able to be apprehended at that time, and they were able to make the switch then. Like that was something else that I thought about. But like I said, we talked about the president. We have what is it? We already have the reveal of Ross, but we have the president, we have Rhodey, and are there any other characters that you think maybe down the line that we may actually have revealed, that actually have been, if you're thinking about where they were with some of the last couple of films, maybe they're acting strangely, so maybe we will come to find out that they are maybe Skrulls.
that's what when you were on Rhodey as well, like the character development, it would be interesting if he was a Skrull, because he's gone from like I forget his original rank. We'll say, like, he's in the like a colonel or whatever, and now he's Secretary of State. It's a weird trajectory, and not only is
Yeah.
that like getting closer to the president, but also if we go back and Armor Wars is about, the real Rhodey coming back and like, all right, now I've been gone for X number of years. I'm not the Secretary of State. I'm whatever he last was when he's gone. That would make that movie much more interesting.
For sure. So I guess, and I brought this up last week too, is by having the scrolls in there and determining when characters were switched out, and factoring in all the development that maybe happened pre-scroll and post-scroll, if you will. It provides a great opportunity story-wise, but my only fear, in what they do with that, kind of similar to how I feel about all the multiverse stuff, is that it provides them an easy out whenever there's a story that doesn't really like click or doesn't really make sense, where it can be an easy explainer. They can explain it away. Oh, they were a variant. Oh, they were a scroll. So I hope they don't try to use that trope with what we have with the scrolls now, and what seems like is happening on certain instances with what we have with variants, to kind of cheat your way out of some of the storytelling that you have. Like I don't want it to kind of be used in a cheapened way. I hope that they use it effectively. Right now, at least with the scroll stuff, with it being introduced, it seems like there's some interesting things that they can do with it. I hope they don't abuse it. So
Yeah, I'm assuming it's not going to be like, oh, Scarlet Witch and all these dead characters were Skrulls the whole time. Here we go. Like it worked in the comics to a degree, but I'm assuming they're not going to bring back any major superheroes.
for sure. So one thing that before we hit, I want to be able to talk on what was revealed at the end with with uh with wifey. So what were your thoughts, your impressions of that, of finding out that this entire time that not only is Fury married, but he's married to a Skrull.
And that's what the question I assume is going to get answered relatively quickly is they didn't make it clear whether he knows she's a Skrull. I'm assuming that he does, and that he's just married to a Skrull because it's he's known about them for 20 plus years. But
Right.
like that's an interesting question that's still lingering. But yeah, it's kind of the Clint Barton situation. Like he's got this whole secret family life.
For sure, and I agree with you. Like we don't really know. I guess the only thing that would go against that thought is how they shot that entire sequence of giving us kind of a glimpse into how the interiors of the house looked with a lot of the art there, where it gave me a glimpse that maybe he's privy to her being a Skrull, because maybe a lot of those things are related to their culture in some type of way, and perhaps by taking on that form that is her human form that she has taken on. But I mean, you could easily go the other way too, because like if she's a Skrull and he knows that he's a Skrull, then why can't she just remain in her Skrull form? Why did she need to change over or switch over? So it's definitely it raises a lot of things and possibilities of what we have going forward, for sure. So like I said, there are some implications of what's happening with this show, and then also implications of how it connects further and what we have in coming down the line. Did you have like any final impressions or thoughts of some other things that we didn't discuss that came to mind in watching this episode, or maybe some questions that you had?
Yeah, and I think the wife could also lead into the big question of why wasn't Fury able to find them a home in the past 25 years? What has he been doing up on Saber, right?
Yeah.
It's like, did
I
he
was gonna say
fail?
sword,
Did he?
yeah, saber.
Yeah, yeah, because they already got a sword, right? So they got to. They're running out of canon
Acronyms and
acronyms.
monikers. But no, what were you saying? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just what has he been doing the past 25 years? And was he looking for a home for them? Was he just using them for a spy network and lying to them? That's a not un-Nick Fury thing to do. There's still a lot of questions about, what his mission's been the past 25 years. And is it, does the fact that he has a Skrull wife mean he doesn't want them to leave Earth? Like,
No, for sure. And I guess in all of those questions that you asked, that's one component of the story that I have enjoyed in trying to kind of figure out, because we kind of gotten teases of it, in the 2 episodes so far, and I feel that we'll probably explore it more. Is there wasn't just one character that dealt with a lot of post-traumatic stress, PTSD from what transpired in Infinity War. We've had a lot of characters that have been dealing with post-traumatic stress and repercussions or consequences of what's happened. I mean, we saw it in Falcon and Winter Soldier, where Falcon was gone. How that affected his family, how it affected a lot of things, with his finances, things you don't even think about. Um, and then also with other characters of how they dealt with the loss themselves, if they did survive, if they didn't get dusted, so having the survivor's guilt of surviving versus those that they cared about that passed away. So I have a feeling that may get explored more. We've touched on it. It feels like they touched on it a bit in this conversation, in that kind of falling out that he had with Talos, in which Talos was talking about you never were the same the last 3 years, and my guess is it's because of him dealing with being dusted and coming back, and those years that were lost, because I mean those aren't years that they can get back. Yeah, they did get returned back, but they all these characters that came back lost 5 years. That's a lot of time for things to go down, in terms of how it can drastically affect your life. And I mean, they've touched on it with other shows too, where even with your place of residence, if you can imagine that, you have folks that were dusted away, and people move into those places, and then those people have to leave the home potentially because the former resident has popped up out of the blue, and now needs to be able to return back to their residence when they were initially thought to be gone, initially thought to be dead. So there was a lot of chaos with that, when they had the latest Spider-Man film, or I should say, two Spider-Man films, but not the recent one, but the one prior to that, and talking about like the repercussions of everyone coming back. So yeah, definitely a lot to unpack. It'll definitely be fascinating to see if there is a change in Gravik, because I feel like, yes, we do have an embittered, and disillusioned Skrull, but from what we saw at the beginning of the episode, it wasn't always that way. The only reason why we've gotten to this point is because there's a feeling of being betrayed, of being lied to, of what was promised, all those years ago. And perhaps in them just having, a lot of times with what we have in the MCU, where a villain goes off the deep end because of understandable occurrence that makes them feel some type of way, that allows that schism to happen between themselves and another character, especially if they do have a close relationship with that character. I mean, if we're thinking of Black Panther with Killmonger, his cousin, if we're thinking of other films, if we're thinking of well, not necessarily Iron Man, he was despicable from the beginning, but I mean, we've seen it in other films where there was that close knit relationship. Oh, Shang-Chi with the father and the son, where by the end of it, perhaps they're able to come to an understanding. Unfortunately, it probably will come, at the expense of perhaps Gravik, losing his life. Hopefully, it doesn't come to that. Hopefully, they keep him around, and maybe they'll have him imprisoned as one of their super Skrulls, and maybe he'll be able to pop up somewhere else, which would be cool. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm assuming at some point they're gonna flash back to Gravik's point of view, as far as did the schism start when Fury got dusted and he got abandoned for 5 years, and then Fury came back and continued abandoning him. I'm assuming there's gonna be a flashback that makes him, because he's already a somewhat sympathetic, like they're setting him up to be a sympathetic villain. So
For
I think
sure.
they're going to continue that, and he's set up to be an interesting character, which I think is going to be cool.
Definitely. Well, Tim, appreciate you hopping on, man, and talking about episode 2. Before I let you go, can you tell folks where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on mostly Instagram at Tim's Tabletop, where I'm sharing currently cosplay stuff, getting ready for San Diego Comic-Con, and in general tabletop crafting stuff. So yeah.
Cool. And once again, guys, I'm your host, Brandon Choi, co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. We'll be at Comic-Con as well. However, there are a couple of cons that will be coming up, 3 as a matter of fact, next week. So we'll be busy, but I'll try to check in with you guys. We have Shore Leave happening next week. We have Contropolis, New Jersey happening next week. And if that wasn't enough, we also have BlurCon happening next week also, same weekend. So 3 of them to enjoy. Hopefully I'll run into some of you guys at either of those 3. But as I said, I'll try to check in with you guys via, my normal avenues, whether it's Twitter or Instagram. My Twitter is down below. Instagram is Brandon Troy ENT. With that said, thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe out there, and see you soon. See you next week. Peace.